I can still see the look on my son's face. His mouth hung open. His eyes darted from me to the front door and back again. For several seconds he couldn't speak. "Movers for who?" he finally asked. I smiled and folded my napkin beside my plate. "For you, sweetheart." The dining room went completely silent. Across the table, my daughter-in-law Ashley nearly dropped her wine glass. Michael laughed nervously. The kind of laugh people make when they're absolutely certain they've misunderstood something. "Mom, what are you talking about?" I took a sip of sweet tea. "The movers." "What movers?" "The ones coming tomorrow." Ashley frowned. "Why would movers be coming here?" I looked around the room. The dining table. The family photos. The hardwood floors my grandfather had paid to restore 20 years earlier. Then I looked back at them. Because this house belongs to me. The color drained from both their faces, and that was the moment everything changed. "Hi, my name is Lorraine Carter. I'm 56 years old. A widow. A mother. A grandmother. And until that Saturday night, my son believed I was a woman with nowhere else to go. To be fair, that misunderstanding wasn't entirely his fault. I had spent years letting people underestimate me. It was easier that way. My grandfather used to say that money talks too much and character doesn't talk enough. I never forgot that lesson. Most people spend their lives trying to look important. I spent mine trying not to. After my husband James died 8 years ago, I simplified my life. I stopped wearing jewelry except for a small blue rosary necklace. I drove an older Buick. I volunteered at church. I helped at community food drives. I spent mornings tending flowers and evenings reading books on my porch. Most people assumed I lived on a modest widow's budget. I never corrected them. Especially my son. Michael was a good boy growing up. Not perfect, but good. After James died, he became protective. At least initially. He checked on me often. Called every few days. Stopped by with groceries. Sometimes we shared dinner. Sometimes we sat quietly and remembered his father. Those were good years. Then things slowly changed. Not overnight. Changes rarely happen that way. Michael married Ashley 3 years after his father's death. At first I liked her. She was energetic, ambitious, confident. She had strong opinions about everything, including things that weren't her business. Over time I noticed something. Ashley measured people by what they owned. The size of their homes, the cars they drove, the neighborhoods they lived in, the vacations they took. I didn't fit into her system. To Ashley, I looked like an aging widow living in a large house she couldn't possibly afford. What she didn't know was that I could afford every brick, several times. The truth began decades earlier. My grandfather, Walter Carter, was one of those rare people who built wealth quietly. Most of the town never knew how much he owned. A few farms, commercial properties, investments. Over the course of 50 years, those assets multiplied. By the time he passed away, his estate was substantial. Very substantial. And to everyone's surprise except mine, he left most of it to me. Not because I was his favorite. Because I was the one who listened. The one who worked beside him. The one who understood what the money represented. Responsibility. Not privilege. Years later, after taxes, trusts, and distributions were completed, I inherited approximately $48 million. Along with the family home, several rental properties, and enough financial security to last multiple lifetimes. I told almost nobody. Not even Michael. Some people may think that sounds strange. Maybe it does, but I wanted my son to build his own life. Not spend it waiting for mine to end. For years, that decision felt wise. Then Ashley entered the picture. The first sign of trouble came when she started making comments about the house. "This place is too big for one person. Have you ever considered downsizing? You'd be happier in a retirement community." At first, I laughed them off. Then the comments became suggestions. The suggestions became pressure. The pressure became assumptions. Eventually, Ashley started speaking about the house as though it already belonged to them. Michael rarely corrected her. That hurt more than I admitted. About a year before that Saturday night, they moved into the house temporarily. Their mortgage situation had become complicated. They needed help. I agreed immediately. Family helps family. At least that's what I believed. The arrangement was supposed to last 6 months. Then 6 months became 12. 12 became 18. Soon they were talking about renovations, furniture, long-term plans, none of which involved asking my opinion. Still, I stayed quiet. I kept hoping they would remember whose house they were living in. Instead, they forgot. Or perhaps they never knew. The final straw arrived on a Saturday evening in early spring. Ashley had cooked dinner. The grandchildren were spending the night with friends. The atmosphere seemed normal. Pleasant, even. Then Michael cleared his throat. I knew something was coming. Mom! Yes. He wouldn't look directly at me. Ashley and I have been talking. That sentence rarely leads anywhere good. I set down my fork. About what? Ashley answered instead. We think it's time for everyone to have their own space. I already knew where this was headed. Michael finally looked at me. Mom, you need to leave tomorrow. The words landed harder than I expected. Not because of what they meant. Because of who said them. My son. The little boy I raised. The young man I helped through college. The man whose first home down payment I secretly financed through an anonymous family trust. And now he wanted me gone. For a moment I considered telling them everything. The inheritance. The ownership records. The trust documents. All of it. Instead I simply smiled. That's fine. Relief immediately appeared on Ashley's face. Then I asked my question. Have you called the movers yet? Neither of them understood. Not yet. But they were about to. Because by sunrise for the first time in their lives, they were going to learn exactly who owned the roof over their heads. For a moment after I asked about the movers, nobody spoke. Ashley stared at me. Michael stared at Ashley. Then both of them looked back at me as though I had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. What movers? Ashley finally asked. I folded my hands calmly on the table. The movers who'll be helping you relocate. Michael laughed. A short, nervous laugh. Mom, I think you're confused. I smiled. No, sweetheart, I'm not confused. The room felt strangely quiet. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed louder than usual. Ashley crossed her arms. Okay, let's stop playing games. What exactly are you talking about? I stood from the table. Why don't we move this conversation to the living room? Neither of them liked that answer. But they followed me anyway. The three of us sat down. I chose my favorite chair near the fireplace. The same chair where my grandfather used to sit when he visited. The same chair where my husband James spent countless evenings reading newspapers. For years it had been my place of peace. Now it felt more like a witness stand. Michael leaned forward. Mom, what's going on? I took a deep breath. The house belongs to me. Ashley immediately rolled her eyes. We know that. No, I said gently. You think you know that. Michael frowned. What does that mean? It means this house has always belonged to me. The confusion on his face deepened. Then I stood and walked toward an antique cabinet. Inside was a locked drawer. From that drawer I removed a thick folder. Not because I anticipated this conversation. Because I had learned long ago that important documents should remain organized. I returned to my chair and handed the folder to Michael. He opened it. At first he looked bored, then puzzled, then alarmed. Property deeds, trust documents, tax records, ownership certificates, page after page. His expression changed with every document. Ashley grabbed several papers from his hands. What is this? The deed, I replied. She scanned it, then scanned it again. No. Yes. No, this can't be right. It is. Michael's face had turned pale. Mom, his voice sounded smaller than before. When did all this happen? About 22 years ago. Ashley looked up sharply. 22 years. I nodded. The property was transferred through my grandfather's estate. The room became silent. I watched both of them struggle to process information that completely contradicted the story they had been telling themselves. Finally, Michael asked the obvious question. Then why didn't you tell us? That question hurt. Not because I couldn't answer it. Because he never should have needed to ask. I didn't think it mattered. Ashley laughed bitterly. $48 million doesn't matter. The number hung in the air. Neither of them had known it until that moment. Michael looked at me. What did you just say? I sighed. I inherited approximately $48 million after my grandfather passed away. His jaw literally dropped. Ashley froze. The silence lasted nearly 10 seconds. Then Ashley spoke first. You're serious? Yes, Michael shook his head. No, I smiled sadly. Yes. The room felt different now. Not angry. Not yet. Just stunned. For years they had viewed me as an aging widow living quietly in a house she could barely maintain. Now they were discovering that almost every assumption they had made was wrong. Ashley stood up, started pacing, sat down again, then stood up once more. Why would you keep something like that secret? Because money changes people. Ashley stopped pacing. I continued. Sometimes it changes the people who have it. I looked directly at her. Sometimes it changes the people around them. Neither she nor Michael responded. That told me more than words ever could. The next morning things became even more uncomfortable. News travels surprisingly fast inside families, especially when money is involved. My younger sister called before breakfast. Then a cousin. Then another cousin. Apparently, Michael had spent half the night on the phone trying to verify what he'd learned. Every answer pointed to the same conclusion. I had told the truth. Around noon, I walked outside to water flowers. The front yard had always been my favorite part of the property. Azaleas lined the walkway. Dogwoods shaded the driveway. Birds nested near the back fence. Simple things. Beautiful things. While I worked, Michael stepped onto the porch. For several moments, he simply watched me. Finally, he spoke. "Why did Grandpa leave everything to you?" The question sounded genuine, not accusatory, just confused. I set down the watering can. "Because I spent 20 years helping him manage his businesses." His eyebrows lifted. "You never told me that. You never asked." That answer seemed to bother him. Not because it was unfair, because it was true. Over the years, Michael had stopped asking questions about my life. He assumed he already knew the answers. Many children do that once their parents reach a certain age. They forget we had entire lives before they arrived. Entire careers, dreams, responsibilities, stories. Later that afternoon, Ashley cornered me in the kitchen. The conversation was considerably less pleasant. "You made us look stupid." I looked up from my coffee. "No, you did. I didn't make any choices for you." Her expression hardened. For a moment, I saw exactly what my grandfather used to warn me about. Not greed. Entitlement. The belief that something belongs to you simply because you want it. "You let us think this was our house." I shook my head. "No, you assumed it was." Ashley didn't like that answer. Neither did I. But truth isn't measured by comfort. That evening, Michael knocked on my bedroom door. He looked exhausted. Older somehow. "Mom, come in." He sat on the edge of a chair. For a long time, he stared at the floor. Then he whispered something I never expected to hear. "I don't know what to think anymore." Neither did I. Because the inheritance wasn't the real issue. The real issue was far more painful. For the first time, my son was being forced to confront how little he truly knew about his own mother. And that realization was only the beginning. The following week felt like living in someone else's life. For years, my days had followed a simple rhythm. Coffee on the porch. A walk through the garden. Volunteer work at church. Dinner with family. Now every conversation seemed to revolve around money. Not memories. Not relationships. Not gratitude. Money. It saddened me more than I could explain. The biggest surprise wasn't Ashley. I had always sensed her fascination with wealth. The surprise was Michael. My son had spent most of his life valuing hard work and integrity, yet now he seemed trapped between two worlds. The man I raised, and the man Ashley wanted him to become. 3 days after our dinner conversation, Michael asked if we could talk privately. We sat on the back porch overlooking the property. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees. A gentle breeze moved across the yard. It should have been peaceful. Instead, tension sat between us. Finally, Michael spoke. "Ashley thinks there has to be some mistake." I nodded. "I'm not surprised. She says people don't just inherit $48 million. I smiled slightly. "People do when their grandfather spent 60 years building businesses." Michael stared into the distance. I still can't wrap my head around it. "I know." The truth was I understood exactly how he felt. Most people hear numbers like that and stop thinking rationally. The amount becomes larger than the person. Larger than reality itself. After a few moments, Michael asked another question. "Why didn't Grandpa leave anything directly to me?" There it was. The question beneath all the others. Not ownership. Not property. Inheritance. I took a slow breath. Because he believed wealth should be earned before it's inherited. Michael looked down. He didn't trust me. He barely knew you as an adult. That answer wasn't cruel. It was honest. Grandpa Walter died when Michael was still young. Most of their relationship existed through holiday visits and family gatherings. They loved each other. But they never worked side by side. Never built anything together. Walter left his estate to the person who helped manage it. That person happened to be me. The conversation ended quietly. Neither of us felt satisfied. Some truths rarely provide comfort. A week later, I learned Ashley had contacted an attorney. Then another. Then a third. Apparently, she was determined to find some legal pathway into the inheritance. The effort didn't last long. Every lawyer told her essentially the same thing. The estate planning had been thorough. The trust was solid. The property ownership records were airtight. Legally speaking, there was nothing to challenge. The assets belonged to me. Period. One evening, I overheard part of a conversation between Michael and Ashley in the kitchen. I hadn't intended to listen. but their voices carried down the hallway. We need to keep looking. Ashley, 3 attorneys already said no. Then find a 4th. There isn't a case. There has to be. I closed my bedroom door. Not because I wanted privacy, because my heart hurt. The discussion wasn't about fairness. It wasn't about family. It was about access. Access to money they believed should somehow become theirs. Later that week, my oldest grandson, Caleb, came home from school. He was 12 years old. Smart. Observant. Far more observant than most adults realized. I was helping him with homework when he suddenly asked a question. Grandma? Yes. Why are Mom and Dad fighting so much? Children always notice. Always. Even when adults think they're hiding things. I chose my words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups worry about things. He frowned. They've been worrying a lot. I couldn't argue with that. He looked down at his math worksheet. I wish things would go back to normal. So did I. More than he knew. A few days later, something happened that changed everything. By accident, Michael discovered several emails on Ashley's laptop. Not because he was snooping. Because she had left the screen open while running errands. The messages weren't illegal. They weren't criminal. But they were revealing. Very revealing. That evening, Michael knocked on my bedroom door. His face looked pale, almost sick. Mom, can we talk? I immediately knew something was wrong. We sat at the kitchen table. For several moments, he said nothing. Then he slid several printed pages across the table. I began reading. The emails were between Ashley and one of her friends. Most discussed shopping plans, vacation destinations, luxury vehicles, jewelry, a larger home, private schools, designer furniture. The problem wasn't the purchases. The problem was the assumptions. Repeatedly, Ashley referred to money she expected to receive, money that wasn't hers. Money she believed would eventually become available once the inheritance situation worked itself out. I finished reading, then looked at Michael. His eyes were filled with disappointment. Not anger, disappointment. Sometimes disappointment hurts more. How long? I asked quietly. I don't know. His voice sounded broken. Maybe years. The realization was devastating. Not because Ashley wanted wealth. Many people do. The painful part was discovering she had been planning a future around assets that belonged to someone else, including me. Michael rubbed his face. I feel like an idiot. I didn't respond immediately. Eventually, I said something my grandfather used to tell me. The people we love sometimes disappoint us. He nodded. But that doesn't mean we stop loving them. Tears appeared in his eyes. For the first time since this entire situation began, I saw something changing inside him. The illusion was cracking. The story Ashley had been telling for years was beginning to collapse. And with it, Michael's willingness to ignore uncomfortable truths. As night settled outside the windows, I realized we had reached a turning point. The conflict was no longer about money. It was about character. And character eventually reveals itself, especially when large sums of money are involved. The question was no longer whether Michael would learn the truth. The question was what he would do once he fully accepted it. The confrontation happened 3 days later. Not because Michael planned it. Because eventually the truth becomes too heavy to carry. Especially when you've spent months pretending not to see it. I was sitting on the back porch that afternoon when I heard raised voices coming from inside the house. At first I tried to ignore them. Married couples argue. It's part of life. But these voices were different. Sharper. More emotional. More final. The argument had been building for months. Maybe years. Now it was finally erupting. I couldn't hear every word. Nor did I want to. Some conversations belonged to the people having them. Still certain phrases carried through the open windows. You lied to me. I didn't lie. You planned all of this. You're twisting my words. Then came silence. Long silence. The kind that usually means someone has finally said the thing they've been avoiding. Later that evening, Michael found me watering flowers. His eyes were red. Not from anger. From exhaustion. Can we talk? I nodded. We sat on the porch swing James had built nearly 20 years earlier. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, Michael broke the silence. I don't know how I got here. I looked at my son. Really looked at him. The gray beginning to appear in his hair. The lines around his eyes. The weariness he carried in his shoulders. For the first time in a long while, I saw not a husband. Not a father. Not a man obsessed with inheritance. I saw my little boy. Lost. Confused. Trying to find his way home. What happened? I asked softly. Michael stared into the yard. We fought. I waited. I confronted Ashley about the emails. How did that go? A humorless laugh escaped him. About as well as you'd expect. He shook his head. She said everybody thinks about money. Most people do. Then she said I'd be stupid not to think about it too. That statement seemed to hurt him, not because it was shocking, because a part of him had begun believing it. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he surprised me. Mom, when did I stop calling just to talk? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? He looked down at his hands. I was thinking about Dad, James. Even after 8 years, hearing my husband's name still stirred something inside me. Michael continued. When Dad was alive, I'd call all the time. I nodded. You did? After he died, I still called. Yes. Then somewhere along the way, his voice faded. I knew exactly where he was headed. The realization was painful. Because it was true. The calls had changed. The visits had changed. The relationship had changed. Slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. Until one day we were no longer talking because we enjoyed each other's company. We were talking because something needed to be handled. A favor. A holiday. A problem. An obligation. Family had become logistics. And that happens to more people than anyone likes to admit. I got busy, he said. I smiled gently. We all get busy. But that's not an excuse. No, it wasn't. The next few weeks brought more difficult conversations. Michael and Ashley began marriage counseling. Whether it would help, nobody knew. But at least they were trying. The grandchildren seemed relieved. The tension inside the house slowly eased. Not completely, but enough to notice. Meanwhile, several friends encouraged me to take a harder stance. One church friend practically demanded it. You should cut him out of your will. Another agreed. After what they did, I would. The advice wasn't unreasonable. Many people would have followed it. Part of me considered it. Late one evening, I sat alone reviewing estate documents. The same documents that had caused so much conflict. Legally, I could change everything with a few signatures, remove beneficiaries, restructure trusts, redirect assets. No one could stop me. The power felt surprisingly empty. I thought about my grandfather. Walter Carter had been many things. Successful, disciplined, demanding. But he had never used money as a weapon. A lesson came back to me from childhood. I must have been 12 years old. A family member had disappointed him badly. I remembered asking why he didn't simply cut the person off. His answer stayed with me for decades. Money can teach lessons, Lorraine, he smiled. But sometimes forgiveness teaches better ones. That memory settled the matter. I closed the folder. No changes, not yet, perhaps not ever. Several days later, someone knocked on my front door. When I opened it, Michael stood there alone. No Ashley, no paperwork, no agenda. Just my son. He looked nervous, almost embarrassed. Can I come in? Of course. We sat in the living room. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the windows. Dust floated lazily through the air. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Michael looked directly at me, something he hadn't done enough lately. I'm sorry. The words were simple, but they felt genuine. I know. No, he shook his head. You don't understand. Tears appeared in his eyes. I wasn't just wrong about the house. I listened quietly. I was wrong about you. That one hit harder, because it was true. For years, he had viewed me as someone who needed protecting, someone dependent, someone small. He had forgotten who I actually was. The woman who worked 2 jobs after his father got sick. The woman who balanced budgets, managed investments, and carried an entire family through difficult years. The woman who had quietly built a life long before he became an adult. I stopped seeing you, he whispered. The room fell silent. That sentence contained more honesty than every conversation we'd had in months. I reached over and squeezed his hand. Not because everything was fixed, because healing had finally begun. As the sun dipped lower outside, I realized something important. The inheritance had never been the real story. The house wasn't the real story. Even the money wasn't the real story. The real story was a son rediscovering his mother. And sometimes before a family can move forward, it has to lose its illusions first. The strange thing about healing is that it rarely arrives all at once. There is no dramatic moment, no magical conversation, no single day when everyone wakes up and suddenly feels better. Healing arrives quietly. One honest conversation, one forgiven mistake, one small act of kindness at a time. That winter life began settling into a new rhythm. Not the old rhythm. Some things had changed too much for that. But a healthier one, a more honest one. Michael started stopping by simply to visit. Not because he needed documents. Not because he had questions about money. Just because he wanted to spend time together. At first, the visits felt awkward. Years of emotional distance don't disappear overnight. But gradually we found our way back. One afternoon he helped me repair a fence behind the property. As we worked side by side, I was reminded of the boy who used to follow his grandfather around carrying tools. Back then he had asked endless questions. Now those questions had returned. Only this time they were about life. Did Grandpa ever worry about losing everything? I smiled. Constantly. Michael looked surprised. Really? Oh yes. I leaned against the fence post. He grew up poor. That fear never completely left him. For a moment, Michael stared at the ground. I think I've been afraid too. That admission mattered. Fear had been driving him for years. Fear of not having enough. Fear of falling behind. Fear of failing his family. The tragedy was that fear had disguised itself as ambition. And by the time he recognized it, it had already damaged the people he loved. Several months later, something happened that made me smile. Michael sold the luxury SUV Ashley had insisted they buy. Then he paid off several debts. Then he started setting aside money for the children's education. Not because someone forced him, because he finally understood the difference between wealth and security. The two are not always the same thing. Ashley changed too. Perhaps not as dramatically, but enough. Counseling forced difficult conversations. Some painful truths emerged. She admitted she had spent years comparing her life to other people's lives. Comparing houses. Comparing vacations. Comparing bank accounts. Comparison had quietly poisoned her happiness. Like many people, she spent so much time looking at what others possessed that she forgot to appreciate what she already had. The process wasn't easy. There were setbacks, arguments, moments of frustration. But eventually progress replaced pride, and that was enough. Spring arrived. The dogwoods bloomed again. The azaleas returned. The property looked beautiful. One Saturday afternoon, nearly a year after the night, Michael asked me to leave our family gathered for a barbecue. Children ran across the yard. Laughter echoed from the porch. The smell of grilled burgers drifted through the air. It felt like family again. Real family. Not perfect family. No such thing exists, just people trying their best. At one point, I sat beneath the large oak tree near the back of the property. The same tree my grandfather loved. The same tree under which he often shared advice. Lily, my oldest granddaughter, joined me. She handed me a glass of lemonade. Then she asked a question. Grandma, yes, sweetheart. Can I ask something? Of course. She sat beside me. Why did you keep the money secret all those years? I smiled. Children and grandchildren always seem to ask the most important questions. The answer is simple. She waited. I wanted people to know me before they knew my bank account. She thought about that, then nodded slowly. I think I understand. I wasn't sure she fully did, but someday she would. Money changes conversations. It changes expectations. Sometimes it even changes relationships. I never wanted my family measuring my worth through numbers. I wanted them to know my heart, to know my character, to know the woman behind the inheritance. Later that evening after dinner, Michael walked over carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to me, then sat quietly beside me on the porch. For a while, neither of us spoke. We simply watched the grandchildren play in the yard. Finally, he broke the silence. You know what I've been thinking about? What? The biggest mistake I made. I glanced at him. There were several. He laughed. Fair point. Then his expression softened. I stopped seeing people clearly. I nodded. Especially you. His voice was calm now. Not defensive. Not ashamed. Just honest. I started looking at what people could give me instead of who they were. The statement hung in the evening air. Then he added something that made my eyes water. You gave me everything long before I ever knew about the money. I looked away toward the sunset. Because sometimes gratitude is harder to receive than criticism, especially from someone you love. As darkness settled across the property, I thought about my grandfather. People often assumed his greatest gift was the fortune he left behind. They were wrong. The money was useful. The property was valuable. But neither was his greatest gift. His greatest gift was wisdom. The wisdom to understand that character matters more than wealth. That relationships matter more than possessions. That gratitude creates a richer life than entitlement ever could. And perhaps most importantly, that money doesn't reveal what life is about. People do. As I watched my family laughing together beneath the evening sky, I realized something. The true inheritance we leave behind isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in values, in kindness, in forgiveness, in the example we set for the people who come after us. If this story reminded you of someone you love, perhaps today is a good day to call them. Life moves quickly, and sometimes the words we postpone are the words that matter most. And if you enjoy stories about family second chances and the lessons that shape our lives, I'd be honored if you shared this story with someone who may need it and subscribed for more stories like this.